Hello students, welcome to the lecture on Introduction to Managerial Communication Learning, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the concept of communication, describe the ways of managerial communication, define business communication, explain the importance and objectives of communication, discuss the principles of communication, explain the forms of communication, understand effective communication, describe the techniques of communication. Let us start with a brief introduction to communication. Communication plays a pivotal role in information sharing. Individuals working together in the same organization need to speak to each other to keep themselves abreast with the latest developments in the organization. It is practically not possible for an individual to do everything on his own. He/she needs a medium which helps him discuss various ideas and evaluate pros and cons of proposed strategies with people around. Managerial communication is a function which helps managers communicate with each other as well as with employees within the organization. Communication helps in the transfer of information from one party, also called the sender, to the other party, called the receiver. Managerial communication helps in the smooth flow of information among managers working towards a common goal. The message has to be clear and well understood in effective communication. The team members should know what their manager or team leader intends to communicate. Effective managerial communication enables the information to flow in its desired form among managers, team leaders, and their respective teams. Managerial communication is of the following two types: interpersonal communication, organizational communication. Let's start knowing them. Interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication generally takes place between two or more individuals at the workplace. Organizational communication. Communication taking place at all levels in the organization refers to organizational communication. Let's discuss the concept of communication. Specific human characteristic: communication is a bond between members of a collectively which allows psychosocial group mixing and ensures normal operation of it irrespective of its size and nature. Defined as a process of issuing a message and sending it in an encrypted way through a channel to recipient for receptive. Communication has become, in a long run, the substance of society. It is more than obvious that all activities organized by people derive from the communication. All human relationships represent communicative interactions that include a symbolic dimension. Without transmission of symbols with attached meanings, relationships between people would be impossible. We start to notify that communicative and organizational actions are interdepending on each other. According to experts, the term communication started to be used in the 14th century, being derived from Latin word communis, meaning to share, being in relationship, having in the time a closer meaning to share, sharing more. From the 16th century, with the post and roads developed, the term is associated with a new meaning, namely forward. As a consequence of the emergence of modern techniques of communication, telegraph, telephone, and so on, in the 19th century, meaning to send go first in use. Various meanings aspects used for communication can meet, and we can say that communication is to put or have something in common without neither prejudice the something nor the transmission parts or terms, individuals, groups, objects involved in the division. Managerial communication concept emerged from the need to provide to the manager optimal interaction means in order to fulfill its functions and roles. Roles of the manager. Emphasizing the importance of communication in organizational management, Henry Mitzberg has defined 3 types of roles that can be fulfilled by a manager in the communication process: interpersonal role, informal role, decision-making role. Let's understand one by one. Interpersonal role. It involves a relationship based on constant communication between managers and subordinates, customers, suppliers, and managers. In this case, managers act as leaders of the organization. According to Henry Mitzberg, the managers lose their time communicating 45% with people outside their control, 45% of managers belonging to the same hierarchical level, and 10% in discussions with their superiors. Informal role. Manager is in a constant search of information from all contacts that could affect its performance and business objectives. Moreover, the manager is sending information both within the organization and beyond it. This role is reflected in the actions of creation and development of information network, in which the manager may act as monitor, disseminator of information, or spokesman. Decision-making role. Using this information, contacts and relationships, resources for recovery, solving conflicts, and initiate optimal solutions for the problems they have to solve. Once the decision is made by the manager, it should be clearly communicated to all other factors. For the successful fulfillment of these roles, the manager must be based on the following communication functions. Information function, monitoring internal and external information obtained through all possible means. Control and training function, to ensure the unity and continuity of team's action towards the set objectives. Function of influence and persuasion, guidance and counseling through which the specific. Modalities of control over information and the behavior of members are realized. Function of integration and retention of information, ensuring efficiency of the organization. Let us now find out the ways of managerial communication. A successful manager is one who communicates effectively with his subordinates. It is really essential for managers to express their views clearly for the team members to understand what exactly is expected out of them. Usually, there are 2 ways managers communicate amongst themselves and with their subordinates. Verbal communication. Communication done with the help of words is called as verbal communication. No written records are available in verbal communication. In verbal communication, individuals need to be very careful about their speech. What they speak and how they speak matter a lot. Managers must choose the right words to address their team members. One has to be loud and clear while interacting with employees at the workplace. Be very clear and precise. Written communication. Communication is also done through emails, letters, manuals, notices, and so on. Such mode of communication where written records are available is often called written communication. Managers must inculcate a practice of communicating through emails with their juniors, as it is one of the most reliable modes of communication. It is essential for the managers to master the art of writing emails. Body language. Managers must also take special care of their body language, facial expressions, and gestures for effective communication. A manager who always has a frown on his face is generally not liked and respected by people. Being a boss does not mean one needs to shout at people. Be warm and friendly with team members. Organizational communication. Organizational communication is of the following two types: formal communication, informal communication. Let's study them. Formal communication. Communication which follows hierarchy at the workplace is called as formal communication. Employees communicate formally with each other to get work done within the desired time frame. Informal communication. Employees also communicate with each other just to know what is happening around. Such type of communication is called as informal communication, and it has nothing to do with designation of individuals, level in the hierarchy, and so on. Direction of communication flow. Upward communication. Flow of information from employees to managers is called upward communication. Upward communication takes place when employees share their views with the managers on their nature of work, job responsibilities, and how they feel about the organization on the whole. Downward communication. Downward communication takes place when information flows from managers to subordinates. Managers often give orders and directions to their subordinates as to what to do and how to do various tasks. Such type of communication is called downward communication. Crosswise communication. It includes the horizontal flow of information between people on the same or similar organizational levels, and diagonal flow between persons at different levels who have no direct reporting relationships. It is used to speed information flow, to improve understanding, and to coordinate efforts for the achievement of organizational objectives. Now let us talk about business communication. It is not possible to have good human relations without communication. On the other hand, effective communication is required not only for human relations but for a good and successful business. In practice, there is no organization without communication. There are organizations with bad communication, and these cannot be considered successful organizations. Managers spend the majority of their time communicating in several forms, meeting, face-to-face discussions, letters, emails, etc. Also, more and more employees realize that communication is a very important part of their work, because a lot of work activities are based on teamwork among workers in different functional groups. This is the reason why communication has become more important in companies. Stages of the communication process. Most managers are aware that their success depends on their ability to communicate. However, most often managers do not know what a perfect and effective communication is. Some say that if employees could understand better their managers, organizations would work easier. The reason why they have not appealed to a collaborative process of cooperation, they did not agree on the communication schemes, did not take decisions together, they blamed each other for failures, and they avoided each other how much they could. Therefore, lack of communication is often a symptom of other problems. Communication skills are not only important, but the need for them is universal. Decoding is a process by which received messages are translated into terms, symbols that have significance to recipients. To illustrate the process of communication, theorists have resorted to an analogy with the model of radio signals in which we regard to a message transmission to the source becomes itself the receiver. During the coding phases, respectively, the deciphering phases, the message can be influenced by several factors such as hierarchy, rumors, inconsistent policy, and most importantly, the absence of a management process adapted to transmission of information or even confusion that can occur in the cycle. Planning, organization, management, control. In the communication process, the receiver's reaction to a message source is a mechanism by which transmitter is verifying that the message was correctly perceived by the receiver. Feedback.
Well, we're going to talk about how the communication process works here. The communication process is extremely vital in terms of increasing your effectiveness in communicating. And what we find is if you have an understanding of the different stages of the process and the different parties involved, you will help increase the extent to which you communicate more effectively. Now, the communication process starts with, in this case, the sender. The sender is the person that is going to be transmitting a particular message. And usually, if we're going to communicate something, we have to decide what it is that we're going to communicate. But not only what, we also have to determine how we're going to communicate that, the means through which we're going to actually communicate the message. This includes everything from face-to-face or verbal communication. This includes email or text and a variety of other mediums. Written communication obviously would fall into this category. And so the sender, what they do is they're in charge of what's called encoding a particular message. And encoding is not only determining what it is that you're going to say, but how it is that you're going to communicate it, including that nonverbal communication piece, right? Things like body language and the tone of our voice, the pace of our voice, whether or not we make eye contact, all factors in to how we send a particular message. Now, the goal here for the sender, or at least it should be, is to communicate something as accurately as possible. And what that means is you have to take into account the knowledge and the education and the background of the receiver of that message. Because if you communicate in a way that cannot be understood, then you're really just wasting your time. It's not very effective. The intent here is to be understood. And so obviously we have the message here, and that is what is encoded. That message gets sent, of course, to the receiver. Depending upon what medium we chose to communicate with, that will transmit a number of different ways. But the receiver, what they're in charge of is decoding that message. And what decoding means is they're trying to understand it. They're interpreting that particular message. And so they're listening to what is being said, and they're trying to assess what that is and gauge it for understanding. Now, the problem, and where you've probably picked up on, is that a lot of times people can hear the same message and take two completely different things. And that's because there's a lot of noise that gets involved in the communication process. Not only do you have to be aware of the understanding of the receiver, but you also have to take into account physical noise, like surroundings. Are there people involved? If you're communicating in a noisy restaurant, there's a physical limitation there where the actual noise in the restaurant is going to inhibit the receiver understanding your message. So that would obviously be in a physical sense, but you also have to take into account the person's mental state. You know, are they preoccupied? You can probably think of a time in when you were involved in a conversation and you're communicating with somebody, but not really. You're kind of going through the motions. You have your mind somewhere else. You're thinking about something. You're preoccupied. And although you're physically present, mentally you are absent. And that obviously is an obstacle or barrier to effective communication. In addition, you also have issues with education. You know, if you're communicating with someone who is of higher education or less, you do have to take that into account, because if you're sending the message, you do want to make sure that the person can understand it, right? If you're going to communicate to a group of elementary school students, it's probably going to look different than if you communicate to a group of college students, because you have to take into account the knowledge and educational level of the audience. And so from a receiver standpoint, if you're interpreting a message, then that could also be a deterrent to effective communication.
Let us now discuss the importance and objectives of communication. There are various objectives and importance of communication. Information. One of the most important objectives of communication is passing or receiving information about a particular fact or circumstance. Advice. Advice is an important objective of communication as it involves personal opinions and is likely to be subjective. Advice is given to influence his/her opinion or behavior. Order. Order is an authoritative communication. The downward flow of information is dominated by orders. Orders may be written or oral, general or specific, procedural or operational, mandatory or discretionary. Suggestion. Suggestion enjoys great advantages over other means of communication like advice or order. Suggestion is supposed to be very mild and subtle form of communication. Persuasion. It is an important objective of communication. In the office or the factory, the lazy, the incompetent and the disgruntled workers have to be persuaded to do their work. Education. Education is a conscious process of communication. The main purpose of education is to widen knowledge as well as to improve skills. Warning. Warning is a forceful means of communication as it demands immediate action. If employees do not abide by the norms of organization or violate the rules and regulations, it may become necessary to warn them. Raising morale. Moral boosting is only possible through communication. High moral results in better performance. Motivation. Motivation energizes and activates a person and channelizes his behavior towards attainment of desired goals. Thus, motivation as a form of communication is very crucial in handling human behavior. Importance of communication. There is more to communication than just talk and gesture. Listening, understanding and interpreting are as much integral to communication as words verbal, written or gestured. Even gestures in communication play a crucial role in conveying and interpreting the message. Importance of communication in business. The success of any business lies as much in networking and building sound professional relationships as it does in individual tact and business acumen. Communication is a crucial decisive factor in business relations. It is very important to say the right things at the right time and at the right place when dealing with partners, customers, stakeholders, media and sometimes even competitors. Any miscommunication or ambiguity can pour pails of cold water on hard work and ruin chances of survival in today's competitive business environment. Maintaining professional etiquette in oral and written business communication is of utmost importance and must not be taken lightly. We should be grateful that we are living in an era of enlightenment where we have access to training on just about anything under the sun. Importance of communication in the workplace. The most important part of running an organization is managing the human resources. This is one resource which does not work on any principle of management, economics, psychology or any other social science. This is the most random and volatile resource which must be managed with great dexterity to reach desired organizational goals. Communication is that lubricant which keeps this source moving throughout the organizational machinery. Importance of communication in leadership. A leader is expected to represent his/her followers and motivate them to reach heights of success through individual and collective effort. Communication is the best equipment a leader can employ to achieve this goal. Even ideals resting upon strong principles can fall flat and fail to motivate due to lack of effective communication skills. Now we shall talk about the principles of communication. Communication is a two-way process of giving and receiving information through any number of channels. whether one is speaking informally to a colleague, addressing a conference or meeting, writing a newsletter, article, or formal report, the following 11 basic principles apply on Introduction to Managerial Communication. Know your audience, know your purpose, know your topic, anticipate objections, present a rounded picture, achieve credibility with your audience, follow through on what you say, communicate a little at a time, present information in several ways, develop a practical useful way to get feedback, use multiple communication techniques. Environmental factors. Communication can be influenced by environmental factors that have nothing to do with the content of the message. Some of these factors are the nature of the room, how warm it is, smoke, comfort of the chair, etc. Outside distractions. The reputation, credibility of the speaker, writer. The appearance, style or authority of the speaker. Listener's education, knowledge of the topic, etc. The language, page layout, design of the message. Communication with decision makers. Innovation and change often depends upon persuading potential users of the benefits of an innovation. To deal persuasively with decision makers, it is necessary to know that and understand their interests and opinions. Principles of effective persuasion. Whether making a formal presentation at a meeting or writing a report or fact sheet, the following principles hold: do not oversell or overstate case, make effective use of understatement, outline the topic we are trying to cover into two parts. The first part should give broad background information, while the second part provides a detailed summary. Persuasion depends on clarity and simplicity. Avoid the use of jargon and buzzwords. Be prepared to back up claims or facts immediately. Incorporate major anticipated objections into program or presentation. Address all relevant aspects of a topic, especially those that may affect the functioning of an organization. Use graphics and audiovisuals appropriately. Consider ways to get. Selecting the best communication method. In communicating with decision makers, use the most appropriate communications methods. Forms of communication. Communication is the key to evolution. Communication evolved ever since it has been known to the living species. However, it was humans who revolutionized it. Today, communication has gone from individual levels of conversing to mass communication. Communication evolved as the human brain developed and became more receptive to the sounds and the events around him. Over a period of time, the historic records will show that forms of communication have evolved very gradually, be it written, oral or pictorial communication. Communication is a process of exchanging information, ideas, thoughts, feelings and emotions through speech, signals, writing or behavior. Types of communication. People communicate with each other in a number of ways that depend on the message and its context in which it is being sent. Choice of communication, channel and style of communicating also affect communication. So there are varieties of types of communication. Types of communication based on the communication channels used are verbal communication, non-verbal communication. Let's study them one by one. Verbal communication. Verbal communication refers to the form of communication in which message is transmitted verbally. Communication is done by word of mouth and a piece of writing. Objective of every communication is to have people understand what we are trying to convey. In verbal communication, remember the acronym KISS, keep it short and simple. Verbal communication is further divided into oral communication, written communication. Non-verbal communication. Numerous books have been written on the importance of non-verbal communications. Some studies suggest that from 60 to 90% of messages effect comes from non-verbal cues. This lecture presents a brief overview of non-verbal communication. Body language, sign language, paralanguage, circumstantial language, space, surroundings and time. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Managerial communication is a function which helps managers communicate with each other as well as with employees within the organization. Advice is an important objective of communication as it involves personal opinions and is likely to be subjective. Organizational communication occurs at all levels of management, is performed on all hierarchical levels, both on horizontal and vertically. Communication is a two-way process of giving and receiving information through any number of channels. People communicate with each other in a number of ways that depend on the message and its context in which it is being sent.